Well, good morning, all. This morning, the Consulting Amigos, there are three of us here today, and we're doing another program for the Micro Giants. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about market characteristics and specifically what that has to do with small businesses. Today, we've got Ed Lasik with us, who is a CPA and a very knowledgeable COO. John Mills has done a lot of operational stuff too. He's more on the technical side because he's owned technical companies and small businesses. And all three of us have done work consulting with small businesses for a lot of years. So we're going to be focusing on markets in the with respect to how they are accessed by small business, which is something that small businesses tend to have a problem with. And it's sort of the subline, how to fail without knowing. If you're in the wrong market and you don't understand your market, you can be trying to sell stuff and never get it done and end up failing and have no idea what really happened. So we'll talk a little bit about that. First, let's talk about the overall characteristics. Oops, this is very sensitive. The overall characteristics of a market itself. And this is an S curve, which typically has been used for many years to explain, where the growth occurs in a marketplace. A new market on the lower left is something that starts out very, very slow. And then as it's accepted by more and more people, it begins to grow rapidly. But eventually the market ends up having to kind of slow down because, well, it's taken all the growth out of whatever market that was. So that's what happens over time. And you can just kind of describe this a little bit by taking a look at something that we're all familiar with, and that is, personal computers. When personal computers started back in the 70s, in fact, they weren't even computers. They were simply boards that you could put together and make your own computer with a little CRT or TV screen, and you'd have to get a keyboard and you'd have to put the pieces together. And until Apple actually um, kind of invented and marketed the first Apple computer, we didn't know what a PC was. That was I think in 78. I bought my first Apple computer in 1979. And so, as we got into the 80s and the 90s, that market really exploded. And we had several dozens of companies that were competing. Most of them went broke. We ended up in this mature area here with Apple remaining in the market, but very small market share. IBM, the large percentage of the share. You had Dell come along basically with kind of a lower approach to a IBM PC. And then along the way, you've got all kinds of other computers that the TS-80, that Radio Shack was selling, the Osborne, and it goes on and on. And John can elaborate on that because he remembers most of those things. Well, how big are these markets? And that is that, well, the mature market has the lion's share of that. That's where the business is, but it's not growing very rapidly anymore. So, you've got to get there and maintain that market. The middle market that is growing rapidly is a small piece of the market, maybe 8 or 9%. The emerging market, the innovation, those are teeny, teeny percentages, and most of those die. Just as in the PC example, you've got a bunch of them, dozens of them that tried to get into that business, and only three or four major brands even survived. So when we take a look at these different characteristics, and we won't spend a huge amount of time on this, but it is fairly intensive in terms of a slide. The characteristics of a stagnant market are that you have to kind of steal the business to grow. And therefore, you've got inflation plus a couple of points of growth. It's so competitive, and it's a very slow moving kind of business. Um, the value profile ends up being you have to develop a low cost with a appropriate and or better quality overall value in order to stay in the market. The growth market, in order to be successful, you have to grow faster than the market itself. Because if you grow at the same rate of the market, you'll just have the same piece. And you might think you're doing well, but the truth of the matter is, if you're not growing faster than the market is growing, you're not gaining on your competition. Um, so you need whatever the market growth is plus several points to say that you really had a pretty good return. The growth is very easy, but it draws a lot of competition into you. When you come up with a new product, and I've done this several times on specific products, not markets, but specific products, while you have the product that is hot, you are in a growth market, but it brings in more people, and therefore you have more competition, and you've got to be prepared to do that. And a brand new market is something that people don't know much about. So you have to spend a lot of time educating them, especially if it's a technical kind of product. They need to understand what it is, how it's going to work, and how it's going to help them. It really requires high-end creativity and sometimes a huge amount of money. There are also these characteristics, which is a little bit different twist on markets. And that is that some markets have high competition, and the other side of the market is low competition. So you have all this variation in between. And then you also have transactional kind of market or relationship kinds of markets. So a transactional kind of market would be selling bubble gum to out of a stand in a store. A relationship, though, it's kind of hard to have like a bubble gum relationship. You've got to have it's like, hey, I really love your bubble gum. Would you sell me more? It's like, come on. So, but relationship markets are very real, and small businesses can excel in them because it has to do with customizing products for your customer, having a trust relationship, and that type of thing. So when you kind of take a look then, so well, where are they? Years ago, I took a look at a bunch of my clients, and I placed them on this chart between transactional and relational, high competition, low competition. These are all small independent businesses. And so you can kind of see where they land. They tend to be up in this area. They're certainly closer to the low competition. Really only three of them are in high competition businesses. They tend to be, let's see, one of these, number 7, is a retail store, and they compete based on a superior location. So they've got a great location, and therefore they get traffic. Therefore, they're able to make transactions. They might be nice to the customers, but they're not really creating a true relationship. It's not necessary. On the other hand, over here would be a CPA firm. A CPA firm there's a lot of competition, but it deals based on relationships. And so they're able to exist. Legal firms fit into this category because of good performance in the past, but also a relationship between the accountant and the business owner, or the attorney and the business owner. And so they're happy with that. They just kind of keep going. And as long as the price doesn't get outrageous, you're going to find that you can hold on to them. So really, the majority of these fall more in the low competition, meaning they have found niche markets. Now, within, say, the legal field, there are niche markets as well. There are lots and lots of, just business attorneys or just patent attorneys, or actually, in legal. And then in the CPA business, you also have specialties where certain firms will specialize. And I think, Ed, you've mentioned several times the one firm that specializes in ESOPs, in employee ownership programs. And they're doing all the business because they really know how to do that specialty. So they would fit kind of in this area, but their competition is not so high because they literally pushed it into the low competition area. So that's kind of gives you a sense of why this kind of a chart is important. So if we take a look at market intensity, I think it's important, and this is just as an example of, well, what are the extreme ends of market intensity? Well, on one hand, you've got over here a well in a desert. It could be an oasis in a desert. And there's only one. So now you might have a lot of them, but in an oasis in particular, there'd just be kind of one. Well, the people who need to have water need water, and they're going to come there at any price. And so you've got this low market intensity. In other words, there's no competition at all. So all you have to do is present the water, sell it. Could be bad water, could be warm water. Of course, John likes warm water, but and they wouldn't necessarily have ice. But and then speaking of ice, on the other end, you've got like the Eskimos, the who made ice houses. And you say, well, gee, there's ice everywhere. Yeah, there's ice everywhere. And every Native American who made igloos could make one. There's a very, very high market intensity in that particular business. And so it's like, well, would you pay me to build your igloo? No, I'll build it myself. I mean, the ice is right here. How about if I just sell you ice? That old sales saying. He could sell ice to Eskimos. This kind of where this came from. It's like that's a rough job. Selling ice to Eskimos is rough. It'd be like selling sand to the Bedouins or something like that. There's so much of it that there's hardly a business there. So that's sort of market intensity. And so where is your business along this market intensity scale? Then take a look at kind of how they range. So I did the same as the chart before last, just kind of showing you where they can range. Up in the top, hardware is transactional. I mean, very transactional. And so if you're in the hardware business, it could be wholesale or retail. But for the most part, you could have a relationship occasionally, like I say hi to the salespeople down at my local Ace Hardware store. But I don't have any relationship with the Home Depot people. I'm there just to do the buying. And you're going to have both high and low competition based on what it is that they're actually selling. So that's a pretty wide one. Retail's similar in some ways, except when you come down into the no competition, this is where people like fashion stores, particularly high-end fashion stores, stores like Gucci and Coach, those kinds of luxury brands tends to be down to the no competition because they're so good at branding. And that actually can create a whole different kind of market for them. When you talk about casualty insurance, for the most part, there's a whole lot of competition there. Relationships are somewhat important, so they're in the middle. But if you're selling life insurance, that would be way down here because while there's a lot of competition, the relational part of that is important. So that kind of just gives you an idea of the overall mix. So that's just a real quick look at markets, different markets, and what that really means. Now, when we get into niche markets, that's where the specific conversation for small businesses gets started because you can take a look at a market based on geography, category, and about 6 other metrics that I've discovered over the years. And that's how you can take what we've just looked at and find a way to turn your market into a niche market.
So I've
So
got a story and a
go ahead.
question, Ron.
Yes.
So the story is related back to the media world that we talked about. In the 1980s, television was predominantly by cable TV. and cable TV was really doing well. And I was involved at that point by supplying components for the guys who made the boxes, and also had a friend of mine who was CFO of a Time Warner uh, franchise or agency in Indianapolis. And so I got to be pretty intimate about the relationship of the box, what it was supposed to do and how it was supposed to do, and what it would offer the client, and also how it was used and paid for. So what happened was, in this particular instance, there was an area of about 4 square miles downtown that was allocated agency rights to sell cable TV. The market for this particular area was geographically stagnant. It was fixed. And yet there was a pressure and a need to grow the market. Well, how
Yeah.
do you do that when there are only so many houses? Well, my friend ended up getting a very, very big promotion out of this. He realized that he was in a price war because he had this geographic market. There were three other suppliers that also had that market that were not in his company name. And so that
Hmm.
it basically came down to can you get the cable to the house and what is the lowest cost for delivering whatever it was.
Right.
And it was a price-driven market. So
Right.
he realized that A, he had to have a competitive price, but how was he going to grow his business? Well, he went through and analyzed all aspects of the business, and he realized that he was losing about 7% of his clients every year, and he was
Hmm.
gaining about 3% clients every year.
Tough position to be in.
Right. And so he was actually going downhill, but he thought to himself, how can I, as a young guy in my 20s, change this? He came up with a strategy that he said, okay, everybody who calls in, what are the indicators of the account being cut off? Late paying, no pay, half pay, threatening letters, whatever it was. So he empowered his staff to go out and offer them services at no cost to bring them back online. And you'd say, well, that's a terrible thing to do. You're giving away money. Well, the services he was offering were the extra movie plans,
Hmm.
the elite package. So what would
Hmm.
happen is he went through and he'd say, you are able to owe this elite package for 3 months at no charge if it engages the client. Well, in a period of time, he was selling all these packages for nothing for a month or 2 months. His clients that were leaving decided they'd try because they're getting something for nothing.
Hmm.
His numbers went around. He cut his loss rate by over 50%.
Hmm.
He added that to his existing rates, and all of a sudden, his growth rate was up to the highest in the nation. And after a year of this, it wasn't because he had the biggest number, it was his growth dynamic was such that he had turned the table for his company. He actually ended up getting vice president of operations for Florida, period. And he moved
Hmm.
his family and he went from a so many square mile boondoggle down to Florida where he headed up. And he used the same principle. He said, we're
Hmm.
going to give away things that we already pay for to keep our clients that are on the edge satisfied. He
Hmm.
didn't give it away to new clients.
Right.
He gave it away to the clients that were on the edge. And he
Yeah.
told them they were valuable and they were important and they needed to stay the course.
Yeah.
Now, I
So
think tell me what that is.
that is a stagnant market because everybody had already had cable, or people who had been offered cable, and most of them had made the decision to do it. So you've got a stagnant market. You only have a few players, so that's classic, and therefore the only way you can really grow that is by creating more value to get more people to pay attention to who you are and why you're doing it. Now, is that a good long-term solution? If he's first, he had a competitive edge. I mean, obviously, he had a competitive edge. But if the other companies have the ability to do that. Now, let's fast forward to today and take a look at both the cable companies and the internet providers and telephone services. How do they do it today? Exactly the same way.
Well, so that was the next step.
Yeah.
After he was down there for a while, all of a sudden the market started going west.
Yeah.
Why? a little company called Ameritech, AT&T, got into they were phone companies. Now, phone
Right?
companies back in that day didn't do anything with
No.
data, and phone companies didn't do anything with media. Well, that was about to change. So, where's my friend today? Well, he left the cable company and now he's with a very large internet provider.
Yeah. Too
Nothing to
bad.
do with actually video or audio because it does all of those things. He is
Well,
just a digital
yeah.
stream
Yeah.
provider.
Yeah, they're the pipeline, and of course, remember what happened, and Verizon got into trouble with this for decades, and that is they spent too much money on putting fiber in, and so the fiber lowered their costs and eventually made a difference. And now Verizon has bought several companies; they're growing again. Their stock dividend is excellent, so it's all turned around. But this is how technology really changed the marketplace itself. And so the question is, well, how are you going to fit into that? He obviously figured out how to do that and has done quite well. But now we're moving into Wi-Fi and we may be moving into satellite. So they're going to have to do it again and again. In every case, once you hit that maturity level, you go through very rapid growth. And once you hit the maturity level, it's a price game. And now the lowest cost provider wins. It's real simple.
Yeah, and related to that, that's where if you want to become a bigger player at that juncture, you need to buy other companies. You need to
Yeah.
consolidate, you need to get bigger
Hmm.
so that you can spread your fixed cost over more business and drive your profits up. And you see that happening a lot with mature businesses.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And they're doing that to, as you mentioned, they're doing that to lower their unit costs so they can be more competitive.
Exactly. So if you're a small company, you have to make a decision whether you want to try to develop new products so you can take advantage of that growth
Mhm.
opportunity, or you sell to somebody else and or you buy something to become bigger.
Right.
And
So,
there's nothing wrong with either way of doing this.
well, right. It's just a matter of where you want to take your company.
Right.
Right.
We've got a company that I know of that does exceptionally good relational work on rehabbing homes. They specialize in unique and older homes. They make things look exactly the way they were. Um, Cost typically is not the issue that is being discussed. The issue being discussed is how long is it going to take, and will it
Mhm.
look the same and meet the
Mhm.
same codes?
Right.
And the deal with it is it's a smaller company. There are less moving parts, um, and it's very word of mouth.
Hmm.
And so it's totally not what a growth company would be wanting to do, but it's something that somebody who has a high care for quality, they want to feel a high degree of pride in what they're doing and how they're doing it, will actually thrive and do very, very well and have a very good lifestyle out of it.
Yeah.
Um,
And they're taking advantage of their skill set to influence the market because not every builder can do that. They don't have the creativity, they can't reproduce things, they don't have the knowledge of historic architecture to be able to do that. And so that creates a wonderful example of a niche where you can exist in a business and but again, you're not going to end up being a giant company as a result because it's too labor intensive, number one. Number two, it's too creative intensive. There are very, very, very few people who are good with their hands, who can be good carpenters, good managers, etc., and also have the ability to really do this business as you've described it. So,
but that is one of the real options that's coming out of this because that degree of care and workmanship has been in some part bypassed by the rush to get big and fast.
yes, absolutely right.
And so there is a growing opportunity for what I'd call artisan, craftsman-based
Mhm.
businesses.
I agree. Yeah. And if I were in that business, That's definitely where I would be, is I would try and be on the creative side, because I would enjoy that, but also because it's a niche that you can create. Now, and you can bring people along and teach them to do those kinds of things. But it's just that it's harder to do. You can't hire them off the street. You got to have, you know, good places to work. They have to enjoy doing it. You have to be able to pay them well. Therefore, you're dealing with customers who have more money. They're the top end of the market, uh, whether it's a small market, you know, a small house, or a big market and a big house. If you want to have, say, a restored vintage home, you're going to pay more for it, as you stated. That's exactly right.
I'm getting back to your CPA example.
I
I
thought you'd
really,
get back to that.
yeah, I kind of like the opportunity to show a CPA firm if you can become specialized.
Hmm.
You're no longer competing with other CPA firms for the most part,
Yeah.
and you become a special agent that's known for a special opportunity and specialized training, etc. And with that, you not only grow your business without having to do a lot of marketing, but you also grow your business and its profitability because you can charge higher rates. And people always talk about, well, I pay my CPA such and such. I'm getting a good deal. And I'm looking at them and saying, just think if you could get 10 times more value from your CPA who charges double that price, that is a better opportunity.
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So
Unfortunately, a lot of small businesses don't think that way because they don't understand the specialties, say, of the accounting
you
industry.
think you should grow your business by cutting your prices.
Mhm.
Just it's the way I was brought up anyway. You think you have to cut your prices, when in
Yeah.
reality, you might be doing yourself an injustice by doing so.
Yes, yes. And I've had many clients where the solution was not to cut prices, and mostly because the owners simply would not go there because they didn't want to be the a lower price, you know. But you have to demonstrate value through branding and through marketing, and through quality, and you can demonstrate that, and we do that in our Burgess Value Diamond that you guys know about, and we have other videos on that, but that's kind of how you can do that, and you become specialized simply by focusing on the value components, that includes price, but if you're going to have a higher price, you've got to have the best quality, you got to have the best service. And that's kind of how you do that. And so that is possible to do. However, I will say from a marketing perspective, it requires you to have the right talent to recognize what those pieces are and then to visually present your company, your product, so that it is properly perceived and positioned as we talked about last week. You've got to position your product to be able to capture the mind of the customer. And it's possible really in most of these businesses that we've talked about. That's hard to do. Not everybody does it. You can't just go down to your local marketing person and say, "Oh, can you help me position my product?" And it takes time. It's taken as long as 3 years, to determine that with clients that I have had, um, which is amazing that they would keep me employed for that long, not having come up with the proper positioning for 3 years. But it has happened at least a couple of cases. Yeah.
So these companies that want to grow and they want to become more profitable, how do they find people like you that can help them get there? Analyze their business, show them kind of where they're at on all these different slides, and try to figure out a strategic plan for getting them
Yeah.
different position.
It's it's a hard thing to do, um, because there are not very many people that are able to look at both the analytical and the creative. And you need to understand who it is that you're dealing with, where their background is, where their strengths are. And I would say, this might sound strange, but I would say that today, in the experiments that I have run with Chat GPT, well, more than that, I actually use it for research now, that if you can properly define your problem, Chat GPT will come up with a structure on where to go and what to do next. Now, it's
Yeah,
not
the
going to,
issue is, and I agree with you on this because I've been using it extensively for cleaning up documents and doing things. It is very, very specific on the parameters you give it. If
yeah,
you offer a wide-ranging question, you're going to get a phenomenal response, which will
yeah,
never, ever come tight.
right.
So I think the experience, you've got to actually be pretty educated to use it well.
Yeah, you probably do, and that would be an interesting program to dig into that. But I have used it and Grok a little bit, but not so much. But ChatGPT understands positioning. And we talked about positioning in the last program. And in that particular case, I mean, they go out and they find who the top people are, the guys who came up with the concepts, the same ones that I, use as references. Um, and they get the concepts right. And they know how to position it. They know how to create value. They know all the components of these things that we talk about. And so it'll say, okay, and you want to ask questions that are specific. I've got a certain marketplace. This is where we're different. This is where we're inferior. These are the skills that we have. These are the skills. These are skills that we have that other competitors don't have. And given this particular market, it might be um, plumbers, plumbers with under 30 employees in Nashville. Could be something very specific like that. And it'll go through and it'll take a look at all those market parameters. And it will take a look at the positioning and it will literally make suggestions on what the what the different pieces are that you can work on to increase the overall value, your quality and your service, and potentially lower your costs so that you can compete a little bit more on margin. And then it'll also talk about building your brand. What kind of a brand image should you be creating to achieve that? I'd be a little more questioning about that. In fact, if I were going to do a branding um, question, if I'm not available to answer the question, then I would say go to go to 3 or 4 AIs and ask them the same identical question and merge their answers to get a plan for how to go about this. Um, if you know somebody really good who has agency experience on the creative side, you might want to guide them with this plan in order to give you some creative input because um, Chat GPT can build a logo for you, but I have to say I have not been that impressed with that because and the reason is because you haven't led chat through the positioning yet. You have to get to the positioning and then you can talk about the branding. If you do do it in the wrong order, you could screw your company up. So it's a big deal, Ed. So and I take the gravity of your question, but I've never been able to really say, oh, here's how you go find that person. Because it's so hard to find somebody. It really is.
Yeah, it really truly is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of small businesses need these exercises to understand what the possibilities are
Yeah.
because they don't know what they don't know. And if you don't know it, how can you build on it?
Right.
There's nothing to build on. You can't ask the right questions.
Well, so I guess I would suggest that anybody who's out there asking that question, subscribe and like the video, as they all say, and watch us on a regular basis and go back through and take a look at the video because collectively we've covered and we'll continue to cover most of these subjects. So I'm not sure. I mean, I know certain individuals that have the talent to do it and have the ability, but most of them are engaged in other things and they don't really have the time to talk to individuals about. And the truth is that many small businesses can't afford to pay these high-end people. They're not going to do it for free, and it's going to be very costly to get it done right. So we're probably the best answer right there, Ed. Keep watching the Consulting Amigos. Well, gentlemen, thank you. It's been a good discussion following that market thing and kind of a little look at markets. It's a different way to think about it. It's kind of an economic way to think about it. But every business is an economic issue, and every business deals with markets. And so you really need to know that market. Now, next time, in the future, we will be talking very, very specifically about the smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller markets that you can get to. That's really the next on the topic. So join us for that, everybody. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much.
So